Welcome to The Criminal Imagination, to my series Unreliable Minds, where I bring the slow unraveling of a mind that once made sense, the flicker of doubt in a narrator's voice, the moment someone says, I am fine, and you know they are not. For this episode, I chose three books: Bret Easton Ellis' American Psycho, Patricia Highsmith's The Talented Mr. Ripley, and Oyinkan Braithwaite's My Sister, the Serial Killer. I chose these books because they frightened me in the ways horror never could. They smile, they hold the doors open, they say thank you. Each of them, Bateman, Ripley, Ayoola, reminds me how civilization hides its teeth behind etiquette. And maybe I'm drawn to them because I have met their quieter versions in boardrooms, in classrooms, something in mirrors. Let's begin. Let's begin with American Psycho. There is a moment in American Psycho when Patrick Bateman is describing his skincare routine with the precision of a surgeon. His voice is calm, his movements rehearsed, and his language clean. It is an act of purification, a ritual of control, and yet, beneath that polished surface, there is rot. When I first read it, I didn't recoil, I listened. I understood something I didn't want to admit. The horror isn't in the violence, it's in how plausible the civility feels. The same civility Tom Ripley performs in The Talented Mr. Ripley. He learns how to smile correctly, how to say old sport, and how to make the rich feel safe in their own superiority. His murders are often incidental to the real seduction, the social assimilation, the desire to belong so completely that he erases himself, and that frightens me because I recognize that hunger, not for blood, but for approval, for access, for the kind of ease that comes when everyone believes your mask. And then there is Ayoola, beautiful, careless Ayoola. She posts selfies with her sister, scrubs blood from tile. She hums pop songs between killings. And yet, it isn't her violence that disturbs me most. It's the gentleness with which she is loved. She is protected by Corides' loyalty, excused by her charm. She doesn't need to be feared to be powerful. She only needs to be liked. That to me is the essence of modern horror. Not monsters that bare their fangs, but those who smile just right. When I first began thinking about antisocial personality disorder, about psychopathy as more than cinematic shorthand, I realized that the traits most associated with it overlap with what we often reward in polite society: confidence, charisma, ambition, charm. These books don't give us beasts, they give us employees of the month. They show us that violence can hide behind a silk tie, a pressed shirt, a grin. Charm, I have learned, can be an act of aggression. It doesn't have to shout or threaten. It can disarm. It can make you complicit in your own undoing. It can make cruelty seem elegant. And what fascinates me most is not how these characters deceive others, but how convincingly they deceive us. I read Bateman's monologues and found myself laughing. I watched Ripley improvise lies and admired his wit. I saw Ayula's flirtations and understood why no one stopped her. The line between empathy and enchantment is frighteningly thin. In each story, violence becomes a kind of choreography, graceful, controlled, rehearsed. Bateman's killings follow rhythm and ritual. Ripley's murders unfold like improvisations on a theme. Ayoola's crimes happen almost as afterthoughts, framed by humor and perfume. None of them rages. They simply continue. That quiet continuation, that composure unsettles me more than any scream could. Part of me wonders if that is why I keep returning to them, because they reflect the banality of cruelty, the idea that someone could harm without heat, lie without malice, destroy without reason, and still look good doing it. In The Talented Mr. Ripley, there's a sentence that's haunted me for years. He could not see why a man should not kill another man if he wanted to. The absence of guilt here is chilling, and the calm logic is worse. Ripley doesn't rage against morality, he simply steps around it. It's this rational elegance that fascinates me. Likewise, Bateman's emotional void mirrors a culture that celebrates consumption over compassion. His violence feels like an extension of his capitalism. Murder is just another acquisition. And My Sister the Serial Killer reframes the same pathology through gender, a woman weaponizing charm not to dominate but to survive. Ayoola doesn't care about control, she cares about freedom. Her killings are inconvenient side effects of being adored. Together, they form a triptych of manners and madness, a study of what happens when personality becomes performance. But here is the secret I keep circling. I don't think I chose them for their blood. I think I chose them for their politeness. When I look at Bateman's fastidiousness, Ripley's imitation, Ayoola's laughter, I see the anatomy of performance itself. They are extreme versions of impulses we all learn to conceal, to adjust, to charm. That's what terrifies me. Not their distance from humanity, but their proximity to it. Charm, in that sense, isn't the opposite of danger, it's its camouflage. And civilization, at its most fragile, relies on everyone pretending the mask is real. There is something deeply seductive about normalcy. It promises safety, belonging, predictability. But these books remind me that normalcy can also be the perfect disguise for predation. That nice is not a synonym for kind. I think that's why I lingered so long on their pages. Because somewhere between admiration and unease, I recognized the quiet seductions I have seen in my own life. The person who listens to perfectly, the colleague whose flattery cuts both ways, the version of myself that performs warmth on days I feel nothing. Charm can be weaponized, deliberately or unconsciously. And once you see that, you start noticing how often the world rewards those who can fake empathy better than they can feel it. In all three novels, the psychopath is not an outsider storming the gates of society. They are already inside. They hold jobs, friendships, lovers. They dress well, speak fluently, and embody every social grace we are told to aspire to, which makes their violence not a break from civilization, but its dark echo. That's why I wanted to explore them through psychology, yes, but also through ethics, aesthetics, and rhetoric. These stories aren't just about individuals, they are about the systems that protect them, the hierarchies that translate charm into immunity, the audiences, readers like me who mistake charisma for humanity. When I chose these books, I don't feel clean, I feel complicit. Booth, in the rhetoric of fiction, wrote that every narrative teaches us how to read it, how to judge or withhold judgment. And maybe that's what these novels do best. They don't show us monsters, they make us wonder when we stop noticing the suit. So, yes, I chose American Psycho, The Talented Mr. Ripley, and My Sister, the Serial Killer, because they frighten me in the ways horror never could. They ask the one question I can't stop circling. If the most dangerous people are the ones who seem perfectly fine, what does that say about the masks we wear every single day? And maybe, just maybe, that's what keeps me up at night. Not the thought that monsters exist, but the quiet realization that they learn their manners from us. Charm is the first act of violence, the lie that precedes the cut. I open on a montage. Bateman's business cards, crisp and identical, spread across mahogany. Ripley standing before a mirror in a tuxedo, smoothing his lapel. Ayoola's red lipstick, just the tip, visible before the glance it blurs it away. I see their gestures as choreography, their smiles practiced, their movements rehearsed, their facades polished, and I whisper to myself, this is no mask, this is the edge of a blade beneath a glove. I chose these books because they frighten me in ways horror novels never could. They don't have gore or monsters. They taught me to fear civility. They taught me that the scariest thing is not the monster who snarls, but the one who bows. They smile, they hold doors open, they say thank you. Each of them, Bateman, Ripley, Ayoola, reminds me how civilization hides its teeth beneath etiquette. And maybe I'm drawn to them because I have met their quieter versions everywhere. To many of us, charm feels like a gift, a gesture of ease, of invitation. But in these novels, charm is the first strike. It disarms before it wounds. It masks the wound beneath the handshake. It whispers welcome while the knife slides in. Let's go back to Bateman's enumeration of his skincare routine. He says, I put lotion on in circular motions, I rinse with cold water, I use fresh towel. Now, this reads like a wellness diary, and yet in that orderliness is a dead calm. In American Psycho, violence is ritual. Bateman's facade is his altar. I understood then what cleanliness meant to him, not purity, but control. The mirror is not a tool of reflection, it is an accomplice. Ripley's charm is subtler. When he says old sport, it's not just mimicry, it's ownership. He steals accents, identities, affection. His violence is more about erasure than impact, to make others disappear so he may become them. When Ripley tells us who he is, he's already rewriting the person in front of him. Ayoola is more dangerous still. She doesn't need to threaten, she leans into brightness. When she laughs, she disarms suspicion. She posts selfies between murders. Her name rings like innocence. She's safety, and that's the knife's crosshairs. These are not monsters invading from outside, they are the polite guests at dinner. They hold your gaze, adjust your napkin, ask your name, and then cut your throat while you smile back. To speak of such characters more, let us look through a lens: antisocial personality disorder, but more precisely, the notion of psychopathy, often operationalized via Robert Hare's psychopathy checklist, PCL or PCLR. Now, I won't go into depth, but a few of them, and the most central, are glibness or superficial charm, grandiose self-worth, pathological lying or manipulativeness, lack of remorse or guilt, lack of empathy, and emotional shallowness, manipulativeness, and more. In Hare's words, a psychopath can tell what you are thinking, but what they don't do is feel what you feel. Or, as another haunting phrase goes, he will smile and deceive you, and when he's through with you, he will desert you and take you with him. He will take your innocence and your pride. The checklist is often divided into two correlated factors: interpersonal or affective traits, and lifestyle or antisocial behavior traits, including impulsivity and irresponsibility. What matters for us now are those interpersonal affective traits. Those are the knives hidden in velvet gloves, because when a person presents themselves as refined, magnetic, confident, when they radiate ease and assimilation, it is harder to see the wound beneath. From the outset, I want the viewer to know this isn't just about diagnosing monsters, it's about understanding a survival strategy. The mask is not always armor. Sometimes it's camouflage, sometimes it's navigation, sometimes it's predation. In the world I inhabit, as a painter, as a creator, as someone who watches people for truths, masks are everywhere. Novels, films, relationships, we all perform. But these characters, they show us something darker: that some masks are forged in cruelty. They are not illusions over self, they are selves made in illusion. Bateman uses his suit, his Apollonia, his card swapping ritual as assurance that the facade will hold. His civility is not a shield, it is the presentation of power, controlled, safe, acceptable. When he screams, it is a failure in the mask. Ripley choreographs each falsity until it becomes indistinguishable from reality, for others, and sometimes for himself. His mimicry is not mimicry anymore, it's metamorphosis. He becomes so skilled at pretending to be others that one wonders, who is the actor, who is the role? Ayoola doesn't show her knife, she shows her lipstick. She knows her smile, she shows her joy. She is sunlight, a childlike guest in a civilized world, and that perhaps is the greatest mask of it all: innocence worn like armor. When we accept charm without skepticism, we invite the blade in. We attend the dance believing the dancer is harmless. We yield space, smiles, trust. In talking about these books, I place myself as the witness, as the one who watches their cards, their mirrors, their lips. I watch how they perform calm. I watch how politeness becomes tyranny. I watch how we readers, viewers, companions lean into their grace because we want beauty, trust, connection. I remember a day in my school. I listened to a speaker whose voice was velvet. The audience leaned closer, they nodded. He told them truths, but his truths were poison. I realized then some speeches are performances of safety before betrayal. Charm is a script written for consent. When I opened American Psycho, I felt a strange double vision. I saw Bateman's aesthetic violence and I recognized a version of myself that rearranged order to hide chaos. When I read Ripley, I understood that identity is for some a costume to adopt, discard, reforge. When I read My Sister, the Serial Killer, I saw how love could become complicity, how loyalty could blur into erasure. I am not innocent. I have in my life glanced at charm and mistaken it for goodness. I have trusted voices that flattered me. I have rationalized manipulations and kindness, and I have silently wondered if the person wearing the suit is allowed in, are we safe or are we complicit? Visually, the montage should linger. The business cards overlap, the fonts whisper status, the mirror reflects Ripley's face twice, once his, once his mask. Ayoola's lipstick smear is accidental, bright against porcelain. This is not a documentary of monsters. It is a meditation on disguise. It is an invitation to look beyond magnetism, to question the comfort of elegance. Here, we do not yet name Bateman's murder in detail or Ripley's impersonations fully or Ayoola's count. We give them space. We let their facades live for a moment before we puncture them. We allow the audience to feel that tension. The mask gleams, but the edge waits. Let me read you a quote. There is no real me, only an entity, something illusionary. And though I can hide my cold gaze and you can shake my hand and feel flesh gripping yours, I simply am not there. This is something Bateman says in American Psycho. For me, this moment was like a moment of a mirror cracking. It wasn't the blood that haunted me in this book, it was the precision, the smoothness of his voice that I could feel from the book, the sterile perfection of his routines, the way he said, I simply am not there without anguish, without apology. It was not a cry for help, it was a corporate memo announcing the death of the soul. I think about Bateman often, not as a man, but as a product. A model built by the late capitalist dream machine, glossy, symmetrical, interchangeable. He's not a monster from the shadows, he's the showroom display of success. In him, Bret Easton Ellis didn't write a person, he wrote a brand. And like every brand, he must be maintained. When I imagine Bateman's apartment, I don't see warmth, I see symmetry. Every surface reflecting back the same gleam of emptiness. Every designer label, every chrome fixture, every orchid stem perfectly aligned. It's not design, it's curation. The apartment doesn't express him, it replaces him. And that's the first thing I understood about American Psycho. Patrick Bateman doesn't exist in the novel. He's an aggregate of gestures, of consumer signals, of borrowed language. He's not a man who buys things, he's a man made of things. He says, I have all the characteristics of a human being: flesh, blood, skin, hair, but not a single clear identifiable emotion. That sentence, like a diagnosis, collapses the divide between body and brand. Bateman's body is a vessel of luxury, Versace, Armani, Valentino, but what it contains is absence. He becomes the hollow where desire collects, the echo chamber of marketing slogans. He doesn't live in a world of meaning, he lives in a world of price. When he recites the specifications of his wardrobe or the calorie count of his breakfast, he is not boasting, he is reciting liturgy. His rituals are sacred acts of belonging to the church of image. Each brand name becomes a kind of sacrament. The tragedy is that Bateman's crime feel like natural continuation of his consumption. He devours everything, body, status, power, and feels nothing. The hunger doesn't end because there is no self to satiate. He is not consuming to express identity, he is consuming to prove he exists. And that is the quiet terror of this character. Bateman's violence is an aberration, it's continuation. The same impulse that drives him to buy an expensive tie drives him to commit murder, possession as a proof of being. When I first read Jean Baudelaire's Simulacra and Simulation, I thought of Bateman immediately. Baudrillard writes, the simulacrum is never that which conceals the truth. It is the truth which conceals that there is none. The simulacrum is true. In other words, when a copy becomes more powerful, more persuasive, and more desirable than the original ceases to matter. There is only the illusion endlessly reproduced. Patrick Bateman is that illusion. He's not a parody of the 1980s Wall Street man. He is the Wall Street man, distilled into purity. Every gesture, his handshakes, his business card, his cologne, his obsession with perfect skin, is simulation. He mimics the aesthetics of success until there is nothing underneath but imitation itself. My name is Patrick Bateman. I live in the American Gardens building on West 81st Street. My life is perfect. This recitation, repeated throughout the novel, is not an introduction, it's branding. Bateman is his own advertisement campaign. Every repetition erases him further, replacing authenticity with performance. If Ripley's charms was mimicry in pursuit of belonging, Bateman's is mimicry in pursuit of control. He doesn't want to be someone else, he wants to be the idea of someone flawless. He becomes, to borrow Baudrillard again, a model of real without origin or reality, a hyperreal. The hyperreal doesn't distinguish between experiences and its image. For Bateman, a romantic dinner and a murder scene share the same aesthetic. They both exist in the flattened surface of simulation. He kills because reality is dull and unbranded. His violence becomes a perverse form of consumption, a way to puncture the numbness of the unreal world he lives in. From a clinical standpoint, Patrick Bateman straddles two diagnostic shadows: antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. Both share overlapping traits: manipulation, lack of empathy, grandiosity, entitlement, emotional shallowness, but they diverge in moral texture. A person with NPD still craves validation. They need witnesses, admiration, applause. Their self image depends on others' perception. They seek to be loved for their brilliance, feared for their superiority. A person with antisocial personality disorder, however, transcends the need of approval. Their manipulation is instrumental, not emotional. They do not desire love, they desire control. They exploit admiration not to feel good but to win. Bateman flickers between these two. He needs to be admired, but when admiration arrives, it disgusts him. He mimics empathy, but when confronted with genuine emotion, he is repelled. He wants to be seen, but the gaze annihilates him. At his core lies not insecurity, but hollowness. In one of the novel's most disturbing passages, Bateman delivers a monologue about social justice and equality over dinner. He says, "We have to end apartheid for one, and slow down the nuclear arms race, stop terrorism and world hunger. We have to provide food and shelter for the homeless and oppose racial discrimination and propose civil rights." It reads almost perfectly, but then Ellis punctures it with the surrounding laughter, the hollow applause of other men in suits. Bateman doesn't believe a word of it. He's reciting moral virtue like a corporate press release. It's not empathy, it's marketing. And that's what makes American Psycho psychologically unnerving. It blurs the difference between the pathological and the aspirational. We live in a world that rewards Bateman's surface traits: confidence, control, charisma, productivity, while ignoring the moral void underneath. If a psychopath is defined by lack of empathy, what happens when a culture begins to value that very trait as efficiency? Bateman's office is a theater of hierarchy. Everything, from his business card to his suit lapel, is a weapon in a war of appearances. When his colleagues produce a card with better typography, Bateman describes his reaction with religious awe. The tasteful thickness of it, oh my God, it even has a watermark. His rage, his humiliation, his envy all stem from aesthetic defeat. He doesn't want to earn power, he wants to embody it. His charm is not spontaneous, is algorithmic. It is what the corporate machine trains into men like him: smile, flatter, dominate, repeat. Under late capitalism, cruelty becomes a performance metric. The man who can fire without flinching, who can cut costs without guilt, who can smile while doing it, is rewarded. Compassion is inefficiency. Bateman's sociopathy is not a religion, it's compliance. He is what happens when a human being internalizes capitalism's core commandment: be desirable, not human. I like to dissect curse. Do you know I'm utterly insane? That line, horrifying as it is, lands like a punchline in the novel. Because he knows his confession will be taken as irony. His madness reads like brand personality. He has transformed cruelty into charm. Charm, in this context, becomes the lubricant of capitalism. It makes exploitation palatable. The salesman's smile, the influencer's gloss, the executive's pep talk all function as soft veneers over systematic violence. Bateman doesn't break the system, he perfects it. His fitness routine, his skincare, his designer wardrobe all signify discipline, but it's a discipline of image, not soul. He curates his body the way corporations curate brands. Erase imperfection, display productivity, exude dominance. In one chilling line, he says, "The better you look, the more you see." But Bateman's beauty blinds him. His aesthetic perfection isolates him from reality. He lives not in New York City, but in a commercial for it. A hyper-real landscape of restaurants, clubs, and glossy bathrooms where every surface reflects him back. His murders are metaphor for the logic of capital itself. Acquire, consume, discard, repeat. The body, like the business card, is an object of possession. People are props, life is product. There is a moment late in the novel when Bateman chases a woman down the hallway with a chainsaw while naked. The scene is absurd, grotesque, cinematic, and yet it feels strangely stylized. I remember reading it and thinking, he's still performing, even in violence, he choreographs himself for an imagined audience. That's when Baudelaire's word returned to me. We live in a world where the real is no longer what it was. Bateman's violence is indistinguishable from entertainment. In fact, he's the perfect protagonist for a culture that sells brutality as spectacle. When American Psycho was published, critics accused Ellis of glorifying misogyny and sadism. But Ellis wasn't glorifying, he was diagnosing. He showed us a system where every gesture of power, every charm, every smile carries an undertone of cruelty. He showed us how capitalism produces Batemans, polishes them, and promotes them. In a late passage, he says, "My pain is constant and sharp, and I do not hope for a better world for anyone." That is not confession, it's a prophecy. It's the voice of civilization addicted to a spectacle and numb to empathy. When I think of that line now, decades after the book's release, I can't help but think of the influencers, the CEOs, the politicians whose language echoes Bateman's. Eloquent, performative, psychopathic. We live in an era where empathy is curated, outrage is monetized, and performance replaces morality. Bateman's has multiplied. Bateman is the corporate predator not because he kills, but because he represents. He's the perfect product of a system that asks us to smile while we devour each other. He sells himself with the same ease he dismembers others. He is what happens when capitalism achieves psychological totality, when the market doesn't just shape behavior but becomes identity. In the end, American Psycho doesn't warn us about madness, it warns us about mimicry, about the danger of becoming so fluent in performance that we forget to feel. In one final moment, Bateman stares himself in the mirror after a murder, blood across his face. He flexes, he admires his reflection, and then quietly he smiles. That is the true image of the corporate predator, a man who mistakes the reflection of horror for proof of existence. This is not an exit. This is the final line in American Psycho. Now, let's talk a little about My Sister the Serial Killer. There is a peculiar kind of terror that wears perfume. It smells like gardenia, like new lipstick, like freshly ironed linen. It smiles, it hums, it apologizes beautifully. When I first met Ayoola on the page of this book, she wasn't a murderer to me. She was magnetic. She entered the novel like light entering a room, and it took a few pages for me to realize that light was fluorescent, sterile, deceptive. In My Sister the Serial Killer, Oyinkan Braithwaite does something ingenious. She dismantles the masculine language of violence. There are no gore soaked basements, no cigarette burnings in the dark. There is just a woman, pretty and charming, whose violence fits neatly into domestic life. Her victims are boyfriends, her accomplice, her sister. I remember the unease I felt reading it, not revulsion, but recognition. Because Ayula's weapon isn't a knife, though she certainly uses one, it's charm. It's the kind of charm women are taught to wield as protection, as survival, as performance. And that to me is what makes My Sister the Serial Killer one of the most quietly devastating portraits of psychopathy. It takes something we associate with safety, femininity, and turns it inside out. Ayoola is beautiful in the way advertisements are beautiful: effortless, glossy, slightly unreal. She's the kind of woman who makes people soften their tone, who draws empathy simply by existing. The brilliance of Braithwaite's prose is how she lets that beauty conceal horror without exaggeration. Ayoola looks like a goddess, even her lies are beautiful. When I read that line, I stopped. I understood it too well, the cultural belief that beauty and goodness are intertwined, that a charming woman is harmless. Braithwaite cracks that illusion open like a seed. Ayoola's beauty isn't armor, it's bait. It's not power derived from dominance, it's power derived from perception. She knows exactly how to look like innocence. When she kills, she doesn't rage, she sighs. She wipes her blade clean, she posts a selfie. The violence is quiet, nearly banal. That's what makes it terrifying. It's plausible. It's concealed in the grammar of everyday life. We are accustomed to male psychopaths, calculated, dominant, openly predatory. They fit a cinematic mold. Patrick Bateman in a suit, Hannibal Lecter in a cage. But female psychopathy, as psychologists Helen Keatley and Catherine Sutton point out, often hides in plain sight. It thrives on social invisibility. Their research suggests that female psychopaths tend to manipulate through emotional intimacy rather than intimidation. They rarely display overt aggression. Instead, they use relational strategies: seduction, guilt, affection, pity. They are less likely to draw suspicion because society expects women to nurture, not harm. Ayoola embodies that paradox. Her murders never seem premeditated. They appear emotional, even impulsive. She even claims self-defensive. And we believe her, at least for a while, because she fits the cultural script of femininity: vulnerable, delicate, incapable of cruelty. But the pattern is there. Boyfriends vanish. Like I said, the pattern is there. Boyfriends vanish. Her tone never wavers. Her sister cleans up the blood. If Ayoola is the performance, Coridi is the audience that cannot leave the theatre. Coridi fascinates me more than Ayoola in a way, because she is the one who knows and yet cannot stop loving. She is the moral compass forever magnetized toward the wrong pole. She is the one scrubbing the floors, hiding the evidence, replaying the lies. There is a passage or line in the book. Coridi says, Ayoola never cries. I cry for the both of us. That single line reveals the structure of their entire relationship. Ayoola enacts, Coridi absorbs. Ayoola kills, Coridi cleans. Ayoola forgets, Coridi remembers. Their dynamic is both familial and forensic. It is easy to judge Coridi, to wonder why she doesn't report her sister. But Braithwaite doesn't let us dismiss her that easily. Through Coridi, we understand the psychological cost of proximity to charm. And this is where attachment theory enters, specifically the phenomenon of trauma bonding. In psychological terms, trauma bonding refers to a strong emotional attachment that develops between an abuser and their victim, often reinforced by cycles of harm and reward. It is the paradox of feeling safest near the source of danger. The fear of abandonment outweighs the fear of violence. Kuridi and Ayula's bond is textbook trauma logic. They share not just blood but the residue of violent childhood. Their father was abusive, their home a landscape of control and silence. Kuridi, the older sister, learned early how to protect. Ayoola learned how to survive through performance. Father's gone, why do you still talk about him? Ayoola asks. Because he's the reason I cleaned like this, Koriti responds. That exchange shows that their roles are inherited scripts. Koriti's compulsion to scrub away evidence isn't just the fear of the law, it's ritual, trauma reenacted. She is cleaning not just Ayula's crime, but her own history. And in that sense, My Sister the Serial Killer isn't just about murder, it's about moral contagion. How charm, when mixed with guilt and obligation, can anesthetize conscience. We often talk about the mask in psychopathy, the charming exterior that hides the void beneath. But in women, that mask is not constructed by the psychopath herself, it is pre assigned by culture. Society trains women to perform empathy, to be accommodating, to smile when furious. It rewards them for softness, for likability, for restraint. Within that framework, the female psychopath can thrive. Because what looks like compliance is, for her, camouflage. Ayula doesn't have to act charming, she only has to act feminine. Every tilt of her head, every sigh, every apology fulfills a script that patriarchy already romanticizes. Her charm isn't exaggerated, it's ordinary. That's what makes her invisible. Sutton and Kitley note that female psychopaths are often underdiagnosed precisely because their behavior aligns with gender expectation. Where a man's manipulation might appear threatening, a woman's can be dismissed as moodiness, seduction, or emotional sensitivity. I think of how the men in Braithwaite's novel describe Ayoola. She's just passionate. She's a free spirit. She's misunderstood. Not one man calls her dangerous. They reserve that label for women who shout, not those who smile. There's a quiet cruelty in how femininity protects her. Each time Korede tries to warn a man, she sounds jealous, bitter, hysterical. And every time Ayoola giggles, the world forgives her again. That to me is the horror of the book. It reveals how patriarchy conspires with psychopathy. The same system that teaches women to appear harmless also blinds them and the people around her to any harm when it comes to women wearing lipstick. As I read, I realized that the true victim of Ayula's crime isn't the men she kills, it's Koridi. She's the one living in suspended guilt, the one trapped in love's distortion field. Ayula's charm works not just on strangers but on her sister herself. That's what trauma does, it blurs the moral horizon. Koridi doesn't excuse the murders, but she rationalizes them the way one rationalizes storms: inevitable, exhausting, survivable. When Ayoola flirts with Tade, the man Koridi secretly loves, the dynamic shifts from sisterly loyalty to primal ache. Koridi's jealousy becomes the only moral pulse left in the story. She wants to save Tade, but she also wants to be loved like he loves Ayoola. I was torn between wanting to warn him and wanting to see how far she'd go. That was a confession whispered in a booth, because it's honest about something many victims of manipulation experience: the strange seduction of destruction. When someone's charisma is overwhelming, their cruelty feels like gravity. Coridi's conscience is still alive but numbed. She tells herself she's protecting her sister, but deep down she knows she's protecting herself. From loss, from loneliness, from the unbearable idea that she's complicit. It is the emotional equivalent of Stockholm Syndrome. The victim defends the abuser because to acknowledge the full horror would shatter their sense of identity. So Koridi keeps cleaning, keeps lying, keeps hoping. What fascinates me about my sister, the serial killer, is how unspectacular the violence is. Braithwaite doesn't restage it for shock, she folds it into a domestic rhythm. The blood is cleaned before it can dry, the body is wrapped in muslin, the murder scenes are brisk, tidy, almost polite. In one chillingly understated line, Khoridi narrates, Ayula's knife glinted then disappeared. When she looked up at me, she was smiling. That smile is the entire novel condensed, beauty overlaying brutality. Unlike Bateman's operatic violence or Ripley's calculated schemes, Ayula's killings lack grandeur. They are spontaneous, almost childish. There is no ideology, no hunger for power, just impulse and indifference. That's what makes them modern, because in an age obsessed with surfaces, filters, followers, aesthetics, indifference becomes its own pathology. Ayoola kills not because she hates, but because she doesn't care. And that difference, quoted in charm, is terrifying. By the final chapters, the novel's tension isn't will Ayoola kill again, it's will Kuridi finally stop cleaning? That's the moral architecture of the story, a war between affection and accountability. When Kuridi finally betrays Ayula's secret to the police, it's not cowardice, it's exhaustion. Her conscience flickers like a candle that refuses to die. I find myself thinking of the poet Adrienne Rich. The liar is someone who keeps losing sight of what she originally set out to see. Coriti is not a liar by nature, but by proximity. She is losing sight not of truth, but of herself. When I finished this book, I didn't think of Ayoola as evil. I thought of her as mirror, a reflection of everything society lets pass as beauty, charm, and grace. She is what happens when femininity becomes both disguise and defense. And Coridi, she is what happens when love becomes obligation, when empathy turns corrosive. Reading this book as a woman, I felt the unease of recognition. How often do we forgive people because they are beautiful? How often do we excuse cruelty because it arrives with a smile? I realized that Ayoola and Kuriti's relationship isn't confined to sisters, it's a cultural pattern. One person performs innocent, another cleans up after them. One charms, other justifies. One kills metaphorically through deceit, manipulation, carelessness, and the other patches the wounds, saying, "It's not that bad." It's the quiet epidemic Braithwaite exposes, the moral exhaustion of caretakers in a world that worships charm. Towards the end, where Koridi dreams she is drowning in bleach water, scrubbing endlessly, Ayoola stands at the shore laughing. I scrubbed and scrubbed, but the stains spread wider. It feels like a metaphor for every relationship where love becomes labor, where goodness becomes erasure. Ayoola may be the serial killer, but Koridi is the one performing the slow suicide of conscience. And when I think of female psychopathy now, I no longer imagine a femme fatale in red heels. I imagine Ayoola, smiling, charming, humming, and Koridi bent over the sink, wiping away evidence that will never stay gone. There is this trauma. It convinces that silence is loyalty and cleanliness is love. And that is the most chilling revelation of all, that sometimes the domestic predator doesn't need to hide her knife. She just needs to know that someone else will wash it. There is this strange intimacy between a reader and a liar. We know they are deceiving us, yet we follow anyway. We lean forward, not back. And that is the quiet seduction of fiction itself. It teaches us to trust a voice even when that voice is manipulating our sympathy. I'll go back to Booth's The Rhetoric of Fiction. And I remember that one line which I felt was written for the characters Ripley, Bateman, Ayoola. Booth writes that every story contains an implied author, not the flesh and blood writer, but the invisible moral architect behind the words. The implied author isn't what we see, it's what we sense. It's the ghost in the grammar. And that ghost decides how we feel about everything that follows. It decides how we judge a murder, how we forgive a lie, how we fall in love with someone who should repulse us. That's the secret power of the rhetoric of fiction. It reminds us that every narrative is a moral collaboration between writer and reader. Which means, terrifyingly, that every time we fall for a charming narrator, we are not just being seduced, we are participating. Booth says that novels don't simply present events, they position us within a moral landscape. They shape the way we experience goodness, cruelty, indifference. When Patricia Highsmith gives us Storm Ripley's cool, measured voice, she doesn't ask us to condemn him, she invites us to understand him. His narration is quiet, deliberate, and strangely elegant. It never trembles. It rarely confesses. And yet, that composure becomes hypnotic. He could not see why a man should not kill another man if he wanted to. Highsmith doesn't tell us this is monstrous. She lets it float, calm as a stone sinking in still water. The implied author, her narrative voice, doesn't shout, "Look how terrible this is." Instead, she whispers, "Come closer. See how logical it sounds once you are inside his skin." That's the rhetorical trick. She doesn't describe evil, she normalizes it through tone. She transforms horror into harmony. I remember thinking while reading Ripley that I was complicit in his crimes long before he committed them. I admired his precision, I understood his envy. I even, for a part of the book, wanted him to succeed. That's how dangerous the moral architecture of narration can be. It builds an empathy bridge straight to the abyss. Booth would say that this is not just Ripley's doing, but Highsmith's. Her implied author teaches us how to read him, how to find elegance where there should be nausea. It's not Ripley who seduces us, it's Highsmith's restraint. Contrast this with Bateman's voice in American Psycho, where Ripley's narration glides like silk. Bateman's crackles with static. He doesn't seduce, he overwhelms. His sentences pulse with excess, like a stock ticker in free fall. He says things casually, sometimes even playfully, as if expecting laughter. And we do laugh uneasily because his mania makes him both terrifying and ridiculous. Bret Easton Ellis doesn't ask us to sympathize with Bateman, he traps us inside his monologue until we suffocate. The implied author here is cruel, cynical. He denies us moral distance. There is no omniscient voice to remind us that Bateman is a monster. Where Highsmith's moral rhetoric is seductive, Ellis's is sadistic. He weaponizes irony. He knows we will keep reading not because we approve, but because we can't look away. That's Booth's idea of reader's complicity, taken to its darkest extreme. We are not just witnessing the violence, we are consuming it page after page as spectacle. And the horror is that we start to recognize the rhythm. We start to find comfort in it. We begin to laugh at all the absurd precisions about reservations, labels, and by laughing, we become accessories to the detachment of these characters. The result? We leave the book unchanged, or worse, a little more fluent in apathy. Booth's framework demands that we ask, what kind of reader does this narrator want me to be? Because fiction isn't just about what happens, it's about how we are taught to feel about what happens. In Ripley, we are groomed into admiration. In Bateman, we are trapped in voyeurism. In Ayoola, we are seduced into apathy. Each narrator shapes a different moral reflex, and in each case, the implied author, whether Highsmith, Ellis, or Braithwaite, designs our participation. That's the uncomfortable revelation. Literature just doesn't reflect moral values, it creates them in real time. When we laugh at Bateman, when we pity Ripley, or when we forgive Ayoola, we are not reacting to characters. We are responding to the rhetorical choreography of tone. Booth warned that novel is always a moral act because narration itself is persuasion. Every sentence is an argument about what deserves empathy. And when we follow these narrators into darkness, we accept their logic, at least temporarily. We learn to find beauty in deceit, order in cruelty, humor in death. In that sense, the psychopath's charm doesn't stop at the page, it extends into our reading posture. We are not innocent spectators, we are their audience, we are their accomplices. Charm is rhetoric, it's persuasion through pleasure, and all these authors understand this perfectly. They give us narrators who perform morality like speech act. And we, educated, critical, allegedly self-aware, fall for all the three. That's the haunting truth Booth forces us to confirm and face. Being moved by a story is never morally neutral. The way a narrative makes us feel is part of what makes us believe. The rhetoric of fiction in that sense is also the rhetoric of civilization. It's the story we tell ourselves to make moral chaos seems elegant. When we read about psychopaths in suits, we like to believe we are watching them from the outside. But Booth's theory suggests otherwise. The moral gaze always loops back. Sometimes after reading these books, I ask myself, why did I enjoy themselves so much? Why did I enjoy all these murders so much? The answer is uncomfortable because the prose invited me to, because the implied author made it easy, because charm, even in text, even between murders, feels like safety. And maybe that's the warning Booth left for readers like me, that art's greatest danger is not that it shows us monsters, but that it makes us love them. If the narrator smiles, we lean closer. If he wears a suit, we mistake performance for virtue. And that is the ultimate rhetoric of charm. It persuades us that beauty and morality share the same face. It lets us believe that elegance absolves cruelty. But what happens when the smile fades, when the suit unbuttons, when the mirror cracks and we see our own reflection in the villain's eyes? That's where we will go next. Because here I talked about the mask, charm, mimicry, persuasion. But then I will talk about what comes after, what is beneath, and it is love, death, and a reader who enjoys both. This has been the criminal imagination. Until next time.